Giorgia Meloni is the first EU leader to make it to the Oval Office since that big tariff announcement. She's also the only one, of course, that was invited to Donald Trump's inauguration. For a president who likes to deal with the individual, she might just be Europe's best hope of lifting transatlantic tensions after a bumpy few weeks.
You think of European Union, very friendly. They rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. 39%. We're going to charge them 20%, so we're charging them essentially half.
So we will focus like a laser beam on the 83% of global trade that is beyond the United States. Vast opportunities.
So is Italy's leader the steward of transatlantic unity? Is she taking the EU 27 with her? Or will it be Italy first? As world leaders head to the Oval Office to try to carve out special treatment, Europe is working out what its place is in Donald Trump's world, just as the UK is. We know, of course, that this week JD Vance talked up prospects of a UK trade deal. There's talk now an agreement could be reached in 3 weeks. But as we know, clarity on the record has not been so easy, I should say, to come by.
Let me ask you again. When do you expect to have a deal?
I can't give a timeline on that.
Days, weeks, months?
The negotiations are ongoing. I don't have anything beyond that to add.
Well, those conversations with our US counterparts are ongoing.
We are engaged in discussions with the United States to strike an economic agreement.
We're not keeping a running commentary on different trade negotiations.
But I guess the danger is that British politics gets stuck on this one fix-all deal. The economy growth involves the government working with business, industry, with Europe, China and the US. We can't just hone one part of that. And right now, it feels like the choice between those global powers is becoming more binary. Well, also listening to that press conference with Donald Trump and Giorgia Meloni was Tiziana Prezzo. Thank you so much, who is the UK correspondent from our sister channel, Sky TG24 in Italy. Thanks for coming across to the UK
Thank you for
Sky
inviting
News
me.
channel to talk
Thank
to
you.
us. It's really interesting because obviously, you know, she has a good personal relationship, doesn't she, with Donald Trump. Do you think she's there on behalf of the whole of the EU, or is she freelancing for Italy?
No, I do think that she pledged loyalty to the European Union, and I do think that she demonstrated it, especially because she managed to reach an agreement with Trump in the sense that he will come to Rome for a state visit, and at the same time she said that she will meet with Europe. That's what she said. What does it mean? That it's likely we can think that he will meet Ursula von der Leyen there, so the president of the European Commission. And we know that, yes, indeed, that was a bilateral meeting today, the one that happened in the White House today, but was at the same time a meeting that was strictly coordinated with Ursula von der Leyen. The two women talked to each other over the phone many times in the last few days. And so, yes, Giorgia Meloni is very much convinced that the US and the EU have to be on the same path. But at the same time, she seems pretty committed to the European Union, to protect at the same time the Italian interests and the European interests as well.
And we're going to see JD Vance, I think, in Italy.
Indeed.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, she's going to be back in Italy very soon tonight, because tomorrow she's going to meet the vice president in Rome. And I would say that this trip to the United States, to Washington, could have been pretty difficult for her, kind of tricky because of what you just mentioned. But I do think that she succeed in being in the right balance between protecting the Italian interests and the European interests as well. And we will see tomorrow what's going to happen with JD Vance, the Vice President of the United States, in Rome.
Thank you so much, Tiziana, for joining us. Tiziana from the sister Sky News channel in Italy. Well, I'm pleased to say that we can speak now to the former UK ambassador to Italy, Sir Ivor Roberts. He joins me from Italy. Thank you very much. So what did you make of what you saw there? You know, is Giorgia Meloni the Trump whisperer? Is she going to help Europe?
Well, I think she is, really. I think Trump operates very much on a personal level. He has his particular likes and dislikes. The two are ideological bedfellows and see eye to eye on most things. There's a couple of areas. I think Meloni has been much stronger on Ukraine, Russia, and asking for a much more robust line on Russia. And she said she thinks tariffs are a mistake. But apart from, I mean, those are two areas where they clearly have got some distance. But she seems to have bridged that gap and used her personal relationship with Trump to good advantage in the European cause as well as the Italian cause. And I think the fact that Trump is going to go to Italy will be a very significant occasion because it will bring the opportunity of a union with the key players on the European side, on Ursula von der Leyen, who Trump has a particular difficulty with, because I think he sees her as in the incarnation of the European Union, who he is accused of being set up to screw the United States. So if he can sit down in the same room as her with Giorgia Meloni acting as a bridge or a peacemaker, I think that's all to the good. So I think it's been a good visit for Giorgia Meloni. It was a tricky hand to play because she obviously can't separate herself from the European Union trade negotiation policy. But I think she's performed pretty well.
Is there any way that Donald Trump might want to carve out something specific with Italy rather than the EU to weaken EU leverage in some way?
I don't see much opportunity for that, not on trade. It doesn't really work like that. The trade deals, unless he invented some specific exclusion for wine from the Sangiovese grape, for instance, which is only found in Italy, I think that would be unrealistic. I think what he said about him being optimistic of striking a deal, and she will have argued in favor of a zero tariff deal on both sides. I think that's the only realistic way forward. I don't think there will be any special deal for Italy. And if there is a tariff-free deal for the EU, then that by definition helps Italy, which sends 10% of its exports in alcohol, food, agriculture generally, pharmaceuticals and motor cars all go to the United States. So it's a very important market.
How important is this moment right now? You know, is Europe at a strategic crossroads?
I think it's quite interesting that Meloni took the line that we must make Europe great together again, echoing the sort of MAGA line with Europe, because von der Leyen was being very negative, only I think in the last 24 hours, saying that the West as we know it is finished. And we have to adjust to a new situation. Presumably she's saying, you know, we can't rely on the United States. Europe must go its own way, which is, I think, a mistake. And it also begs the question of where the United Kingdom fits into all that. But if this meeting in Rome can bridge the gap and be the motor for a European United States re-engagement, then I think that will be an important step forward. It's certainly a path I would recommend.
So Ivor Roberts, former UK ambassador to Italy, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Italy. Well, meanwhile, across the Atlantic, talks are underway in Paris this evening as Europe and Ukraine tried to plead their case with the Americans over the war with Russia. The talks are being hosted by President Macron. Here's what he told those in attendance earlier.
Thank you for being here and having worked so hard on the basis of the proposal made by the US administration. And I think this is a very important occasion to have convergence with our Ukrainian friends and amongst the Europeans alongside with you, because I think everybody wants to get peace, for sure, and a robust and sustainable peace. And this is a thing we clearly all pursue. And now the question is about the phasing, the way to approach this results, which is the one we do wish. And I suggest that we try to wrap up all together, perhaps without the media now.
Let's bring in our panel for this evening, shall we? The former Director of Strategic Communications for Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider, and Boris Johnson's former advisor, Joe Tanner. Thank you both. Lots going on around the world today. Let's start with Giorgia Meloni in Italy. Joe, what did you make of what we saw? They've obviously got a kind of personal relationship, haven't they?
Yeah, there were a couple of things that I thought were quite striking. The first was that he made this very strange comment, but something I guess we get used to with Trump, about how she was amazing and that she was almost universally liked, something you can't say about everybody, which seemed like a bit of a sort of a snub or a sort of jibe at other leaders. And I thought, very interestingly from her, she played that. I mean, that press conference, that environment now post-discussions is sort of like the bear pit that you have to sort of prepare for more probably than the chat that goes before it. And I thought it was really striking that she talked about the West. She opened up her piece talking about the geographical area and almost, you know, I presume because the UK isn't part of Europe, we were sort of part of the geographical West, and she was sort of trying to align Europe much more with the US than she was about talking about Europe as a whole or even Italy as a whole. So I thought it was interesting positioning from her, and he seemed to lap it up. The one thing I thought was very interesting was J.D. Vance did, to me, not look very happy. He looked quite stern, quite uncomfortable. He was very bolt upright. Body language for him was interesting, and he didn't really say anything. So I'm interested to see if he maybe he didn't get the grape exclusion that he wanted. I don't know.
Did you notice a stern J.D. Vance?
I didn't, but I mean, as we know from that signal group that was created that he was in, he takes a very dim view of Europe as a whole and views Europe as having freeloaded off the US, which, I mean, I think is factually wrong, but that's what he thinks. Now, for Meloni, this has gone extremely well. She's been trying to position herself as sitting between the two. She did a big interview with the FT and has been marketing herself. And she survived the bear pit. That's gone very well for her. But for Europe and also for ordinary people in the US, getting to some kind of a trade deal is a big step beyond having quite cordial, friendly meetings between two people who are both from the same bit of the far right of politics and both like each other. And I think that's going to take more than, you know, some nice talk. Trump wants to get some kind of a fundamental win. That's why he's doing these big renegotiations, is to say, I can enforce worse terms of trade on my trading partners and they will have to suck it up. Now, Europe doesn't want to suck it up. China can fight back, which is why it's the only country so far that really properly has fought back. It's got enough economic heft to do that. Europe is slightly unsure. It wants to appeal to reason a bit and say, look, it makes more sense for us to have zero tariffs either way, which may be true, but that's not what Trump thinks.
OK, thank you both. We'll come back to you in a minute, but with all this talk about US-EU relations going on, Starmer himself did get a bit of a boost earlier. The Prime Minister was earlier featured in Time magazine's 100 Most Influential People list, featuring alongside Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg and Blake Lively. Well, the Prime Minister's entry, I should say, was written by none other than European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. She wrote, throughout his career, he worked to safeguard the values of justice and democracy, even taking on Vladimir Putin's government, representing the widow of murdered Kremlin critic Alexander Litvinenko. Those same principles have guided him since he became the UK's Prime Minister this past July as we embark on building this new security architecture. I am glad to have someone with Keir Starmer's dedication and strong principles as a partner. What do you make of that, Joe?
You hear the gasps of the
Yeah.
Brexiteers. The fact that
I haven't seen anything
It's
that
nice
warm
to be
for a
liked.
while.
I mean, it's always nice to have something said about you, but I mean, that is pretty full on, right? I mean, I guess that's a sign of the optimism, perhaps, from where Europe hopes that the conversation's going to go. I mean, I guess it's a get the first moving quick to say something nice.
Yeah, we're in a new era of European relations, James?
Well, I think we have to be, because firstly, what's going on with the US makes any deals that we've had there, the US is our biggest trading partner as a single country. It's unreliable, to say the least now. So improving our relations with Europe, as well as with China and with other trading partners, is a kind of sensible strategy that we should be following. And with the EU, there are some quite easy wins, which could reduce frictions in trade, and that would give us a bit of a boost.
OK, thank you both for now. Now, yesterday, the Supreme Court decided the legal definition of a woman is based on biological sex. Today, public bodies have been getting to grips with what that actually means in practice after being told to review their guidance. And British Transport Police has become one of the first to confirm it's changed its strip search policy after that decision.
I welcome the decision by the court to give clarity to women, but also give clarity to service providers going forward, and we welcome that judgment. The most important thing that we have now is that clarity from the court, which means that NHS services, other services in the public and the private sector now have that clarity to provide those services.
I think that a review of Equality Acts and the Gender Recognition Act is a good idea. These laws were written 20 years ago plus, when the world was different. A lot of people are trying to change what the law means. The Supreme Court has given a judgment, but I think that we need to update those laws to ensure that they are there to prevent discrimination, not for social engineering.
Let's bring James and Joe back in, shall we? Joe, it feels like yesterday we obviously had this kind of big moment, the judgment. Now we're getting to grips with what that actually is going to look like in practice.
Yeah, and I think there's always, lots of people describe this as very simple and common sense and lots of phraseology. And I think the challenge really is that even though that judgment says what it says, the interpretation of it, the law is always interpreted. And so actually what that means in practice is really the next bit of the journey that has to happen. And I'm sure there will be some controversy and I'm sure there will be some problems. But there are also interesting conversations that have started, which have actually been going on all along. But, I'd heard in the run-up to this, people talking about third spaces. And interestingly, people talking about things like, well, the third space can be a disabled toilet. Well, hang on a minute. What happens to the disabled people that fought for the rights to have a space that means that they can take that bit longer and they need the extra space? You can't just suddenly give that away to a group that have now not got what they wanted because of this judgment. So I think there's a real challenge. There is still a lot to be navigated for public services, for businesses. And what I really hope, I think one of the sad things out of this whole thing is how toxic the debate became. And even though the judge, the court themselves, the judge actually said yesterday that, this shouldn't be about sort of celebrating and it shouldn't be about one side winning victory over the other. And yet, actually, that's some of what we've seen. And yet, at the heart of this are still real people with valid concerns on all sides. And so I hope some of the heat will be taken out of this and some really pragmatic solutions will come forward.
And on those real people, I'm interested to hear your view on John McDonnell. Yesterday, he tweeted saying that trans people should have been heard from more over the course of all of this. Do you agree with that?
I think, generally speaking, that's true. And I think when you're talking about marginalised groups or very small groups of people that are spoken about, they should be spoken with and you should hear from them. And I think that's the case for trans people. That's the case for disabled people if you're talking about doing something with their services or their access. But I think this whole thing doesn't provide the clarity. Rachel Reeves said it brings clarity. What you read about the British Transport Police shows that it really doesn't bring clarity. I mean, if they're going to be strip searches of people, you can see how that could go. People who an officer might say that someone looks male when they're female, and they are strip searched. It opens up a whole load of things, which isn't what I think anybody would want. Which is, people should be treated with dignity and in a pragmatic way, and where you have conflicting interests, you find a way to manage that, because no one wants to have trans women being strip searched by male officers either, even if they say they don't want trans women in prisons or in women's prisons or whatever it might be.
Do you think we're going to see more politics around this? You know, do you think we've answered the legal question? Is the politicisation going to continue?
Well, it already started again today. I mean, immediately there were clips released of how many times Keir Starmer had said something. There were pictures of who had said things. Even Rosie Duffield had obviously came out quite quickly about Keir Starmer. So the politics is still there. And in reality, I think we have to remember that, and I do have sympathy with the people that are involved, but it is a small group of people. When you actually look at the amount of debate and the amount of time that has been spent on interviews and in sort of conversations and debate about this issue, when actually there are so many other things to talk about, there is some sense of perspective. And so I think this idea of pragmatic solutions, bringing people in from communities to actually work out what those solutions might be, is the important bit, and actually taking this sort of aggression out of it, which is where the politics has really ended up, because it's been, if I say something, I'm terrified of upsetting somebody, and then I get a load of abuse online, and even to a point of someone leaving their political party. So I do think there needs to be a real pause, a real breath taken, and a positive step forward to actually make sure that people's interests are taken into consideration.
Okay. Thank you both. We could talk about this for hours, but we've got to move on. That story, I'm sure, will feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the PR consultant Alex Dean and the Belfast Telegraph columnist Alison Morris. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Leading business groups warn in a joint letter that the Employment Rights Bill will be deeply damaging. I was speaking to one of the signatories about why they think things need to change. Stay with us. Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, the government suffered another blow today when it comes to business confidence, with 5 of the leading business groups raising concerns in a joint letter about the Employment Rights Bill. Well, as you can see, Srinivas Singh, our political correspondent, is with us. Tell us a bit about this letter.
Yeah, so these are the 5 biggest business groups in the UK, and they comment on policy widely, but it's quite rare to have a joint intervention from all 5 of them. And this is over the Employment Rights Bill, as you say, which is a big chunky piece of legislation. And the government have been working with businesses, you know, through consultation, behind the scenes, even before the general election. So it's quite surprising that they've come out publicly all together. And essentially they've written to members of the House of Lords because this big chunky bill is now going to be in the Lords. And essentially they've written a very extensive letter with many of their concerns with the bill. I won't bore you with all of them.
Ones?
The main ones essentially are these 2, sorry. So unfair dismissal and 0-hour contracts. So unfair dismissal, essentially in place at the moment, you don't have any grounds to bring a claim against, you know, in a tribunal against your employer for unfair dismissal until you've been employed for 2 years. Now, Labour want to change that. They want to say you can have that from day 1. But clearly, businesses say this is going to be a problem. And they say that they're going to have to make less risky choices. And where they really feel that's going to be a problem is they won't be able to hire, as they say, on the margins of the labour market. So essentially, the pool of people that they're looking at is hugely contracted. The other one they have a bit of a concern with is 0-hour contracts. Now, we know, you know, delivery drivers, Uber drivers, these kind of contracts. How that will change in the bill is, at the moment, if you're on one of these 0-hour contracts, you can stay on one of these contracts. But if you don't want to be, your employer will have to give you a certain hours of guaranteed work. Now, businesses say they're too risky, they can't weather this, and they're unhappy with this. But these are quite chunky points of the bill. These are not kind of amendments or, you know, tinkering on the edges. These are core bits. So it's quite a big concerns that they have it. And I think this just gives you sort of a sense of where businesses are at. They've mentioned they were hit with the increases to national insurance. That was something that we saw in the autumn statement.
Yes.
I mean, it's nothing to do with this bill, but they've chucked it in there because clearly this is where they're just feeling constantly squeezed. This is the relationship they have with the government. And that's why they're kind of doing this today, I think.
Have we had anything from the Tories?
Yes, so this sailed through the Commons, and one of the reasons it's addressed to the Lords is because whilst it sailed through, because Labour have a massive majority, the Tories did oppose it. Now, you've got Andrew Griffiths today saying that this is has damaging implications for living standards. It's kind of echoing what this letter said. That's not hugely surprising, but you've got this sense where they're both competing to be the party of business. I think what's quite damaging is this last paragraph, though. This is the kind of stinging critique that they've reserved for the last paragraph, and they essentially are trying to hit the government where they know it matters. So their growth mission, and they also say this is a recipe for damaging, not raising living standards. So 2 things the government have basically staked their reputation on, and they're saying you won't get growth with this, and potentially people's living standards will get worse. Now, speaking to the people behind the bill, I think what they're thinking are, this polls very well. This is strengthening workers' rights. It plays particularly well in those very blue, previously red wall areas.
It's not a big surprise, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's shifting the burden from employers to employees. And so it's not surprising that businesses are a little bit uncomfortable with that balance. But clearly these 5 today are saying it's hurting the government where they want to make gains.
Very quickly, let's have a look at, I think we've got a sense of business confidence.
Yes, so this is, one of the signatories, I should say, did provide this, but this is investment confidence. And essentially, it goes back to 2017. It's a bit of a ride, but you've got 2 peaks. So this is where companies feel like they want to invest in the UK. Now, the pandemic, obviously not a great peak, but there, don't know if you want to circle it.
Oh, there we go.
That is a Labour government for you in terms of how businesses are thinking. And the peak right at the bottom is the autumn statement. But essentially, they've never got above zero. And I don't think with this bill, these businesses are saying that's going to get any better.
OK, Serena, thank you so much for explaining all of that so clearly for us. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to Alex Hall-Chen from the Institute of Directors about why their organisation has signed that letter. Thanks so much for coming on the programme. Can I ask first why you guys have signed this letter now? Because we know that the Employment Rights Bill has been in Parliament for several months now.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're encouraging the Lords to do really is properly scrutinise the bill at the committee stage, which is where they're at now, and to introduce measures to mitigate what we see as potential unintended consequences of the bill, which we feel weren't addressed at the Commons stage.
And is this just about the Employment Rights Bill, or is it other things like the National Insurance rise as well? You know, I'm kind of interested in why now specifically. Was this a straw that broke the camel's back?
I mean, there's no doubt that it's all linked. So this month, as you referred to, there's been a big increase in employers' national insurance contributions. There was an above-inflation increase to the national living wage. And combined with the upcoming changes to employment rights, employers are really struggling under the increased costs that are associated with employment. So we feel that government has an opportunity at the moment to at least soften the edges of some of the work that they're doing around employment rights to really just help employers with those increased costs that they're facing at the moment and to reduce the likelihood of what we see at the moment as being a big risk of employers cutting back on their hiring intentions.
Now, a group chat mishap seems to have become all too common in politics as the Shadow Justice Secretary found out himself this morning when he accidentally added all his contacts to a WhatsApp chat. The group, which included MPs and journalists, was initially called Marathon, but then changed to just V. The confusion, I'm sure this is all quite confusing for people listening, of course, got rumours swirling about potential leadership ambitions. But Kemi Badenoch says that she thinks it could have been to do with the running of a different kind. Here's what she said when she was asked about it earlier.
Yes, and then no, I think is the correct answer to that.
Is he campaigning to replace you?
I think he's running a marathon. That's what I've been told. I don't really understand yet what happened with the WhatsApp group, but it's not the first time this week that loads of journalists and politicians have been added to a WhatsApp group. Seems to be the trend these days.
Oh, these WhatsApp mishaps. Let's bring Joe and James back in, I should say. Joe, what did you make of this? Were you added to this group?
No, I wasn't.
I'm quite offended I wasn't, yeah.
Funnily enough, I've had a few messages. I've had a couple of screenshots sent to me of the chat where it just has Robert Jenrick has removed and sort of people's names. And, of course, we can remember, particularly during Brexit, where there were sort of resignations and suddenly someone got kicked out of the WhatsApp group. So it's sort of bringing back a few echoes, I think, for some people of sort of scarred by those moments. But very funny that Kemi Badenoch described Robert Jenrick as running a marathon. Some people would say that running for the leadership is like running a marathon. It's not a sprint. But I'm sure this was an innocent mistake. But I think while it is a funny story, there is one really important thing about this, which is these are people that make policy about tech all the time and, you know, that make decisions about tech. And loads of them don't know what they're doing. We've had only a minister had to resign about a WhatsApp group he was in and how he handled himself, Andrew Gwynn. We've then had this one, which was an attempt to sort of send a message which as a broadcast, which turned out to be setting up a group. And it sort of makes you realise that people involved in this stuff don't always know what they're doing, really, which is a bit worrying.
Yeah, and I mean, it feels like, Westminster is just addicted to WhatsApp, isn't it, James? Has that been as long as I can remember?
Yeah. It's totally addicted to WhatsApp. And being in little groups, people like to be in little groups. They like to know that they're in a group or someone else is in a group. But I mean, he was trying to organise his marathon. Maybe it was.
He was trying to fundraise.
He was trying to.
It's for his attention.
If he was being smart, he would say, "Oh yes, I was doing this on purpose to get this kind of media coverage, and now you can give money to my marathon. P.S. I keep all the data in Robert Jenrick and I can use it for future campaigns."
Is it clever comms?
It could be. It's not, though, is it? But it could. it could be clever comms. It's the same thing with the signal group with the bombing plans for Yemen from the US officials. For a bit, the journalist is going, is this clever comms? Are they trying to play me? No, it's just
This is
stupid.
really scary,
No, it's
actually.
just
It's very
stupidity.
Have you ever had a WhatsApp mishap?
No, but I run the UK Women's Parliamentary Football team. I set it up nearly 8 years ago, and we have had a WhatsApp group with journalists, with staffers, and with politicians on it for the whole of that time, all through COVID. And I can say that group, hand on heart, know how to handle themselves. We've never had any issues with it. I mean, we had, even during tough times in politics, we had people saying, I'm raising this in the House, can you support me? You used it for good reason.
OK, thank you both so much. And of course, we wish Robert Jenrick lots of luck with his marathon. That's it from us tonight. Sophie will be back next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. Up next, it is The UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mee. Thanks so much for watching The Politics Hub.